The final notes of Beethoven's Symphony No. 9 echoed through the Ridgemont High School band room as 16-year-old Sophia Brennan carefully disassembled her silver flute, placing each piece into the velvet-lined case with a meticulous care that had become second nature after 6 years of dedicated practice. It was Thursday evening, March 22, 2018, and the spring concert was only 2 weeks away. The advanced band had been rehearsing for nearly 3 hours, perfecting the complex arrangements that would showcase the musical talents Ridgemont High had cultivated over decades of excellence in the arts. Sophia glanced at the clock above the whiteboard, noting that it was 8:45 p.m. Band practice had run longer than usual, but she didn't mind. Music was her passion, her escape from the typical teenage pressures that seemed to overwhelm so many of her classmates. The flute had been her voice since elementary school, and she had dreams of studying music performance at the prestigious Eastman School of Music after graduation. Her flute, a professional-grade Yamaha that her parents had saved for months to purchase, was more than an instrument. It was an extension of herself. Mr. David Carlisle, the band director who had mentored Sophia since her freshman year, was organizing sheet music at his desk when she approached to return the folder containing her parts. At 16, Sophia was the first-chair flutist and one of his most dedicated students. She had never missed a practice, arrived early for every rehearsal, and often stayed late to work on challenging passages that other students found difficult. "Excellent work tonight, Sophia," Mr. Carlisle said, looking up from his music stand. "Your solo in the second movement is really coming together beautifully. I think the audience is going to be amazed at the spring concert." Sophia smiled, her face lighting up with the quiet pride that came from recognition of hard work paying off. She was naturally reserved, preferring to let her music speak for her rather than seeking attention through words. The band room was nearly empty by the time Sophia finished packing her instrument and gathering her sheet music. Most of her classmates had left immediately after practice ended, eager to get home for dinner or to meet friends for evening activities. But Sophia never rushed these moments. She took time to ensure her flute was properly cleaned and stored, that her music was organized, and that she had everything she needed for the next day's individual practice session. Jessica Chen, Sophia's best friend and the band's second-chair flutist, was waiting by the door with her own instrument case. The two girls had been inseparable since middle school, bonding over their shared love of music and their similar personalities. Both were quiet, studious, and deeply committed to their craft. Jessica's parents had offered to drive Sophia home after practice, a routine they had established early in the school year, when Sophia's mother, Ellen, had started working evening shifts at the hospital. "Are you ready?" Jessica asked, adjusting the strap of her flute case across her shoulder. She had been watching Sophia's methodical post-practice routine with patient amusement. After 3 years of friendship, Jessica understood that rushing Sophia through her instrument care was impossible and counterproductive. The two girls had often joked that Sophia treated her flute better than most people treated their cars. Sophia nodded, shouldering her own case and picking up her backpack filled with homework and sheet music. The girls walked together through the quiet hallways of Ridgemont High, their footsteps echoing off the lockers that lined the corridor. The school felt different in the evening hours, larger, somehow, and filled with shadows that seemed mysterious rather than familiar. As they reached the main entrance, Jessica's phone buzzed with a text message. She checked it quickly, then looked up at Sophia with an apologetic expression. "My mom says she's running about 15 minutes late. She got held up at work and is just leaving now. Do you want to wait here, or should we call your mom?" Sophia considered the options. Her mother, Ellen, was working the night shift at Ridgemont General Hospital, where she served as a registered nurse in the emergency department. Her father, Michael, was attending a work conference in Chicago and wouldn't return until Friday evening. Calling her mother would mean pulling her away from patients who needed care, something Sophia was reluctant to do unless absolutely necessary. "I think I'll just walk home," Sophia said after a moment of consideration. The decision was not unusual. She had walked home from school many times during her 4 years at Ridgemont High. The route was familiar and relatively safe, taking her through quiet residential neighborhoods where she knew many of the families. The distance was approximately 2 miles, a pleasant 25-minute walk that would give her time to think about the music they had rehearsed and to mentally prepare for her individual practice session the next day. Jessica looked concerned. It was nearly 9 o'clock in the evening, and while Ridgemont was generally considered a safe community, walking alone at night wasn't something they usually did. "Are you sure? I really don't mind waiting with you until my mom gets here. We could call your mom or maybe get a ride from one of the other band parents." Sophia appreciated her friend's concern, but she was confident in her decision. She was a responsible teenager who had been walking and biking around Ridgemont independently for years. The route home took her through neighborhoods where she had friends and acquaintances, past houses where she had babysitting jobs, and along streets where she had sold Girl Scout cookies and participated in school fundraisers. "I'll be fine," Sophia assured Jessica. "It's not that far, and I know the way like the back of my hand. Besides, I could use the fresh air after being in the band room for 3 hours. Text me when you get home, okay?" The two friends hugged goodbye, promising to see each other the next day for their usual lunch period practice session. Sophia left Ridgemont High School at exactly 9 p.m., stepping into the cool March evening air with her flute case slung across her shoulder and her backpack containing her homework and sheet music. The temperature was mild for late March in Pennsylvania, hovering around 50 degrees with a light breeze that carried the promise of spring. Streetlights illuminated the sidewalks, and the residential neighborhoods she would walk through were well lit and familiar. The first part of her route took her along Maple Street, a main thoroughfare lined with small businesses and older homes that had been converted to apartments for college students attending nearby Ridgemont University. This section of the walk was the most public, with occasional traffic and other pedestrians making their way to evening destinations. Sophia walked confidently, her pace steady and purposeful. Mrs. Helen Rodriguez, who owned a small bakery on Maple Street, was locking up her shop when she noticed Sophia walking past. Mrs. Rodriguez knew Sophia from the many occasions when she had stopped by the bakery before or after school, usually to purchase treats for band fundraisers or to buy coffee and pastries for her parents. She waved from across the street, and Sophia waved back, pausing briefly to call out a friendly greeting. After approximately 10 minutes of walking, Sophia turned onto Elm Avenue, entering a quieter residential neighborhood where the houses were larger and set back from the street behind well-maintained lawns and mature trees. This was one of Ridgemont's most established neighborhoods, where many families had lived for generations and where crime was rare. The streetlights were somewhat more sparse here, but the area felt safe and familiar to Sophia. It was along Elm Avenue that Sophia encountered the last person who would report seeing her that evening. Tom Henley, a neighbor who lived 2 blocks from the Brennan family, was walking his elderly golden retriever when he spotted Sophia approaching on the sidewalk. Tom knew the Brennan family well. His daughter had been in school with Sophia's older brother, and he had attended several school concerts where he had heard Sophia perform. Tom later told investigators that Sophia had seemed completely normal during their brief interaction. She had stopped to pet his dog, asked about his daughter who was now away at college, and mentioned that she was looking forward to the upcoming spring concert. Their conversation lasted approximately 5 minutes, during which Sophia appeared relaxed and happy. She gave no indication of being concerned about anything or anyone, and she seemed to be enjoying her evening walk. After saying goodbye to Tom and his dog, Sophia continued along Elm Avenue toward the final stretch of her route home. This last section of her walk would take her through a small park that served as a shortcut to her neighborhood. Ridgemont Community Park was a 10-acre green space with walking trails, a playground, and a small creek that meandered through its center. During daylight hours, the park was popular with families, joggers, and dog walkers, but it was generally quiet in the evening hours. Sophia had used the park shortcut hundreds of times over the years. The path was well maintained and took approximately 5 minutes to traverse, emerging near the entrance to her subdivision. The route through the park would save her nearly 10 minutes compared to walking around its perimeter on the main roads, and she had never encountered any problems or concerning situations during her previous trips through the area. However, Sophia never emerged from Ridgemont Community Park that evening. Her path through the park should have taken her to Oak Ridge Drive, where she would have turned left and walked 3 more blocks to reach her home on Birch Street. When she failed to arrive home by 9:30 p.m., her expected arrival time based on leaving school at 9 o'clock, there was no immediate cause for alarm. Ellen Brennan was in the middle of her shift at the hospital and was not expecting Sophia to call or check in. The family's routine was well established. Sophia would walk home, complete her homework, practice her flute for 30 minutes, and then go to bed at a reasonable hour to ensure she was rested for school the next day. Ellen typically called home around 10:30 p.m. during her dinner break to say goodnight and to check that Sophia had arrived safely. When Ellen called home at 10:30 p.m., she was surprised that Sophia didn't answer the phone. She tried calling twice more over the next 15 minutes, growing increasingly concerned when her calls went to voicemail. Ellen knew that Sophia was responsible about answering the phone, especially when she was expecting her mother's nightly check-in call. Ellen tried calling Sophia's cell phone, but those calls also went directly to voicemail. This was particularly troubling because Sophia was usually very responsive to phone calls and text messages from her parents. Ellen sent several text messages asking Sophia to call her immediately, but received no response to any of her communications. At 11 p.m., Ellen called Jessica Chen's house to ask if Sophia was there, or if Jessica knew anything about delayed plans. Jessica's mother, Linda Chen, explained that Jessica had arrived home around 9:30 p.m. and that Sophia had chosen to walk home alone rather than wait for their ride. Linda expressed concern when she learned that Sophia had not arrived home, and she immediately woke Jessica to ask about the evening's events. Jessica confirmed that Sophia had left school at 9 o'clock to walk home and that she had seemed completely normal and confident about making the trip alone. Jessica felt terrible that she hadn't insisted on Sophia waiting for the ride, though everyone understood that the decision to walk had seemed reasonable at the time. Ellen left her position at the hospital immediately, asking a colleague to cover the remainder of her shift so she could go home and search for Sophia. She drove the route that Sophia would have taken from school, looking for any sign of her daughter or any indication of what might have delayed her arrival home. The search revealed nothing: no abandoned Flute case, no sign of struggle, no indication that Sophia had stopped anywhere along her usual route. When Ellen arrived home at 11:30 p.m. to find the house empty and no messages from Sophia, she immediately called the Ridgemont Police Department. The dispatcher who took her call was initially reassuring, explaining that teenagers sometimes lost track of time or made unexpected stops without notifying their parents. However, when Ellen described Sophia's responsible personality and consistent communication habits, the dispatcher agreed to send an officer to take a missing person report. Officer Patricia Lynch arrived at the Brennan home at midnight to begin the initial investigation. Lynch was a 15-year veteran of the Ridgemont Police Department who had handled numerous missing person cases involving teenagers. Her first step was to conduct a detailed interview with Ellen about Sophia's habits, mental state, and any recent changes in behavior that might explain her absence. The interview revealed a picture of an exceptionally responsible teenager who was thriving academically and socially. Sophia was a junior at Ridgemont High with a 3.8 GPA, planning to apply to several prestigious music programs for college. She had a small circle of close friends, all of whom were also serious students involved in the school's music program. There were no reports of romantic relationships that might have caused emotional distress, no indication of depression or anxiety, and no history of rebellious behavior or conflicts with her parents. Officer Lynch asked about Sophia's route home and any people she might have encountered along the way. Ellen provided a detailed description of the path Sophia would have taken, including the shortcut through Ridgemont Community Park. Lynch made note of this information and requested that additional units be dispatched to search the park and the surrounding neighborhoods. At 12:30 a.m. on Friday, March 23rd, multiple Ridgemont police units began searching for Sophia along her intended route home. The search included the residential neighborhoods she would have walked through, the community park, where she was last believed to have been heading, and the area around her home, where she might have encountered friends or neighbors. The initial search of Ridgemont Community Park revealed no immediate evidence of Sophia's presence. The park's walking trails showed signs of recent use, but in the darkness, it was impossible to determine whether any of the footprints or other traces belonged to Sophia. The search teams used powerful flashlights to examine the entire park, including areas off the main trails where someone might have wandered or been taken. Officer Lynch also contacted Jessica Chen and Tom Henley to confirm the timeline of Sophia's movements that evening. Both interviews corroborated Ellen's account of Sophia's intended route and her expected arrival time at home. Tom Henley was able to provide a precise time for his encounter with Sophia, 9:15 p.m., which helped establish that she had been making normal progress toward home when last seen. As Friday morning dawned, the search for Sophia expanded to include K-9 units and additional personnel from the Pennsylvania State Police. The Bloodhounds were able to track Sophia's scent from Ridgemont High School along Maple Street and Elm Avenue to the entrance of Ridgemont Community Park. However, once inside the park, the scent trail became confused and eventually disappeared entirely near the creek that ran through the center of the green space. Loss of the scent trail near the creek was troubling to investigators. Officer Maria Santos, who worked with the K-9 unit, explained that scent could be disrupted by water, strong winds, or the passage of time. However, the pattern of the dog's behavior suggested that Sophia's trail ended abruptly rather than simply fading away, which could indicate that she had been picked up by a vehicle or that her scent had been deliberately masked. Detective Robert Walsh of the Ridgemont Police Department took over the investigation on Friday afternoon, as it became clear that Sophia's disappearance was not a simple case of a teenager losing track of time. Walsh had 20 years of experience in criminal investigation, including several missing person cases involving young people. His approach combines systematic investigation techniques with an understanding of the psychology of both missing persons and potential perpetrators. Detective Walsh's first step was to expand the interviews to include everyone who might have had contact with Sophia in the days and weeks leading up to her disappearance. This included her teachers, classmates, neighbors, and anyone who worked at businesses along her walking route. The goal was to identify any unusual interactions or individuals who might have taken special interest in Sophia. The interviews consistently painted a picture of a well-liked, talented teenager who had no apparent enemies or conflicts. Sophia's teachers described her as an excellent student who was quiet but engaged in her classes. Her classmates knew her primarily through the band program and described her as friendly but not particularly social outside of music-related activities. Neighbors uniformly described her as polite and responsible, often commenting on her dedication to her musical studies. One interview provided a potential lead that would prove significant later in the investigation. Mrs. Dorothy Kim, who lived near the entrance to Ridgemont Community Park, reported that she had seen an unfamiliar van parked near the park on several occasions over the past month. The van was dark blue or black, appeared to be an older model, and often remained parked for extended periods with no visible occupant. Mrs. Kim had noticed the van because it was unusual for vehicles to park in that particular area for long periods. The location was not convenient for park access, and there were no businesses or residences that would explain someone leaving a vehicle there regularly. She had considered calling the police about the suspicious vehicle but had never done so because it didn't seem to be causing any immediate problems. Detective Walsh immediately issued a bulletin to all law enforcement agencies in Pennsylvania, asking for information about dark-colored vans and their owners in the Ridgemont area. The description was also released to local media in hopes that members of the public might provide information about the vehicle or its driver. The investigation expanded to include a thorough examination of Sophia's digital footprint. Her cell phone records, social media accounts, and computer usage were analyzed for any indication of unusual communications or interactions that might provide clues about her disappearance. The digital investigation revealed typical teenage activity communications with friends about school and band, searches for information about college music programs, and social media posts about her musical interests. However, investigators did discover one concerning pattern in Sophia's online activity. Over the past 6 weeks, someone had been regularly viewing her social media profiles and her posts about band performances. The viewer had not interacted with her posts or attempted to communicate with her directly, but the frequency and timing of the views suggested systematic monitoring of her activities. Tracing the source of the profile views led investigators to a public computer at the Ridgemont Public Library. Library records showed that the computer had been used by multiple patrons during the relevant time period, making it impossible to identify the specific individual who had been monitoring Sophia's social media activity. However, the discovery suggested that someone had been deliberately tracking her activities and schedule. As the investigation continued, Detective Walsh began developing a theory that Sophia had been targeted by someone who had been observing her routines and waiting for an opportunity to approach her when she was alone. The regular pattern of her evening walks home from band practice would have been easy to observe and predict, especially for someone who had been monitoring her social media posts about rehearsal schedules. The theory gained support when investigators discovered that several other young women in the area had reported encounters with a man driving a dark van who had approached them under various pretenses over the past several months. The incidents had not been reported as a pattern because they occurred in different jurisdictions and involved different law enforcement agencies. Detective Walsh coordinated with neighboring police departments to compile information about these encounters. The pattern that emerged was troubling. A middle-aged man driving a dark van had approached young women in secluded areas, often offering help with directions or claiming to be looking for a lost pet. In most cases, the young women had declined his offers and continued on their way, but several reported feeling uncomfortable about the interactions. The investigation into the van sightings and suspicious encounters led to the identification of several potential suspects. Background checks revealed that one individual, Kenneth Morrison, had a criminal history that included charges related to stalking and harassment of young women. Morrison lived approximately 15 miles from Ridgemont and owned a dark blue Ford van that matched the description provided by witnesses. When investigators attempted to locate Morrison for questioning, They discovered that he had left Pennsylvania abruptly just days after Sophia's disappearance. His landlord reported that Morrison had broken his lease without notice, paid outstanding rent in cash, and moved out with very little advance warning. He had provided no forwarding address and had disconnected his local phone service. The search for Kenneth Morrison became a priority for multiple law enforcement agencies. His photograph and vehicle description were distributed throughout the Mid-Atlantic region, and his information was entered into national databases for missing persons and wanted fugitives. However, Morrison proved as elusive as his alleged victim. Despite extensive efforts, no trace of him or his van could be found. As weeks turned to months without any significant developments, the Brennan family struggled to cope with the devastating uncertainty of not knowing what had happened to their daughter. Ellen reduced her hours at the hospital to focus on coordinating search efforts and working with investigators. Michael, Sophia's father, took extended leave from his job in marketing to dedicate his time to the search and to supporting his family through the crisis. The couple found comfort in the overwhelming support they received from the Ridgemont community. Sophia's classmates organized vigils and fundraisers to support the search efforts. The high school band dedicated their spring concert to Sophia's memory, performing her solo piece with an empty chair where she should have been sitting. Local businesses donated money and resources to help fund reward offers and search activities. The first anniversary of Sophia's disappearance brought renewed media attention and a fresh wave of tips from the public. Detective Walsh appeared on several television programs, appealing for information about Kenneth Morrison and the dark van that had been seen in the area. The publicity generated hundreds of new tips, each of which was investigated thoroughly but ultimately led nowhere. As 2019 became 2020, the active investigation into Sophia's disappearance continued, but with fewer daily developments. Detective Walsh maintained regular contact with the Brennan family and continued to follow leads as they developed, but the case had effectively become a cold case, waiting for new evidence or information. The COVID-19 pandemic presented additional challenges for the investigation, as travel restrictions and public health measures limited the ability to conduct certain types of investigative activities. However, Detective Walsh used the period to conduct a comprehensive review of all evidence and to coordinate with federal agencies about similar cases in other states. The review identified several other missing person cases involving young women who had disappeared under similar circumstances over the past decade. The cases were scattered across multiple states, but they shared common elements. Victims who were responsible teenagers with no history of running away, disappearances that occurred during routine activities in familiar areas, and suspected involvement of an individual driving a dark van. Working with the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, Detective Walsh helped develop a profile of a potential serial predator who targeted young women in small communities throughout the eastern United States. The profile suggested an individual who was highly mobile, carefully planned his crimes, and had extensive knowledge of law enforcement investigative techniques. In the summer of 2021, the investigation received an unexpected boost when Kenneth Morrison was arrested in North Carolina on unrelated charges. Morrison had been living under an assumed name and working at a construction company when he was identified through fingerprint analysis following his arrest for assault. North Carolina authorities immediately contacted Pennsylvania investigators about Morrison's capture. Detective Walsh traveled to North Carolina to interview Morrison about Sophia's disappearance. However, Morrison refused to cooperate with the investigation, claiming he had never been in Pennsylvania and denying any knowledge of Sophia or the other missing women cases. Despite extensive questioning and investigation, no physical evidence could be found linking Morrison directly to Sophia's disappearance. The breakthrough in the case came in March 2023, exactly 5 years after Sophia had vanished. A group of environmental science students from Ridgemont University were conducting water quality tests along Beaver Creek, which ran through several communities, including Ridgemont, when they made a discovery that would finally provide answers about Sophia's fate. The students were working in a remote section of the creek approximately 3 miles downstream from Ridgemont Community Park, when their metal detector indicated the presence of buried metal objects near the water's edge. Initially assuming they had found discarded trash or old farming equipment, the students began carefully excavating the area as part of their environmental cleanup project. What they uncovered instead was a silver flute case buried approximately 2 feet beneath the creek bank. The case was tarnished and damaged by years of exposure to moisture, but it was still identifiable as a high-quality instrument case. Inside the case, protected by its tight seal, was a professional-grade Yamaha flute that had been carefully disassembled and placed in its original position. The students immediately contacted local authorities, recognizing the potential significance of their discovery. Detective Walsh arrived at the scene within an hour, his pulse quickening as he examined the flute case. The instrument matched exactly the description of Sophia's flute that had been provided by her parents and band director 5 years earlier. Forensic examination of the flute and case confirmed that they had belonged to Sophia Brennan. The instrument's serial number matched the records provided by the music store where it had been purchased, and DNA analysis confirmed traces of Sophia's genetic material on the mouthpiece and keys. The discovery finally provided concrete evidence of what had happened to Sophia, though it raised new questions about the circumstances of her death. The location where the flute was found became the focus of an intensive forensic investigation. The burial site was approximately 3 miles from where Sophia was last seen entering Ridgemont Community Park, suggesting that she had been transported to the location either voluntarily or by force. The careful burial of the instrument indicated that whoever was responsible had taken time to conceal evidence of the crime. Forensic specialists used ground-penetrating radar and cadaver dogs to search the area around where the flute was discovered. The investigation revealed additional buried items that had belonged to Sophia, including her backpack, sheet music, and personal belongings. Most significantly, they discovered human remains that DNA analysis confirmed belonged to Sophia Brennan. The condition of the remains made it difficult to determine the exact cause of death, but forensic examination revealed evidence that was consistent with homicide. The positioning of the remains and the careful burial of her belongings suggested that Sophia had been killed shortly after her disappearance, and that her body had been deliberately concealed at the remote creek location. The discovery of Sophia's remains provided closure for her family, while simultaneously reopening the active investigation into her murder. Detective Walsh worked with forensic specialists to examine every piece of evidence recovered from the burial site, hoping to find traces that might definitively link Kenneth Morrison or another suspect to the crime. The forensic examination revealed several important clues that had been preserved by the burial conditions. Fabric fibers found with Sophia's remains did not match her clothing from the evening she disappeared, suggesting contact with her attacker. Most significantly, investigators found DNA evidence from an unknown male individual on several of the recovered items. The unknown DNA was compared against samples from Kenneth Morrison and other suspects who had been identified during the investigation. However, none of the comparisons produced a match, indicating that Sophia's killer might be someone who had never been identified or questioned during the original investigation. The DNA evidence was entered into the Combined DNA Index System, CODIS, the national database used to compare DNA evidence from crime scenes across the country. The search revealed potential links to several unsolved cases involving missing or murdered young women in other states, supporting the theory that Sophia's killer was a serial predator who operated across multiple jurisdictions. Working with federal authorities, Detective Walsh began coordinating with law enforcement agencies in states where similar crimes had occurred. The investigation revealed a pattern of disappearances that spanned more than a decade and involved victims from Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, and North Carolina. The crimes shared common elements: young women who disappeared during routine activities, vehicles matching the description of Morrison's van, and burial sites near water sources. Despite the expanded investigation and the DNA evidence, Sophia's killer remained unidentified as of 2024. Kenneth Morrison died in prison in North Carolina while serving time for assault charges, taking any knowledge he might have had about Sophia's case to his grave. The DNA evidence continued to be compared against new samples entered into national databases, but no matches had been found. The Brennan family finally had answers about their daughter's fate, but the knowledge that her killer had never been brought to justice remained a source of ongoing pain. Ellen and Michael established a memorial scholarship in Sophia's name for young musicians, feeling that honoring her passion for music was the best way to ensure that her memory would continue to inspire others. The scholarship fund has helped dozens of students pursue musical education over the years since its establishment. Each year, the recipients perform a special concert in Sophia's memory, playing some of the pieces she had been rehearsing during her final band practice. The concert serves as both a celebration of her musical talents and a reminder of the promising life that was cut short. Ridgemont High School's band room now includes a small memorial plaque honoring Sophia's contributions to the music program. Her music stand remains in its place at the first chair flute position, serving as a reminder to current students of the dedication and passion that Sophia brought to her musical studies. Mr. Carlisle, who continued teaching until his retirement in 2022, often spoke to his students about Sophia's commitment to excellence and her kindness toward fellow musicians. The case of Sophia Brennan continues to be studied by law enforcement professionals and criminologists interested in serial predator behavior and interjurisdictional crime investigation. Her disappearance highlighted the challenges police face when dealing with criminals who cross state boundaries and the importance of communication and cooperation between agencies. Detective Walsh retired from the Ridgemont Police Department in 2023, but he continues to work as a consultant on cold cases involving missing persons. He has never stopped hoping that advances in DNA technology or new information from the public might eventually lead to the identification and prosecution of Sophia's killer. The silver flute that once brought joy to Sophia and beautiful music to her audiences remains in evidence storage, a silent witness to both her talents and her tragic fate. The instrument that should have carried her to a career in music instead became the key that finally solved the mystery of her disappearance, proving that sometimes the most precious possessions can provide the answers that bring closure to those left behind. Today, the banks of Beaver Creek, where Sophia's flute was discovered, have been returned to their natural state. A small memorial marker placed by her family serves as a quiet reminder of the young woman whose love of music touched so many lives. The creek continues to flow as it has for centuries, carrying with it the memory of a talented teenager whose story serves as both a tragedy and a testament to the persistence of those who never stop searching for justice. The routine evening that should have ended with Sophia practicing her flute at home instead became a mystery that spanned 5 years and involved multiple law enforcement agencies across several states. Her story continues to resonate with musicians and families throughout Pennsylvania and beyond, serving as a reminder of how quickly a normal day can turn into unimaginable tragedy, and how the search for truth can continue long after hope seems lost.